Hello once again everyone and welcome back to the Zettel. We're going to be picking this series back up again over the summer. It's been about 8 months since I started this series, or rather since I touched this series, and we're going to be now beginning into the larger Vinden section and the further fighting coming off of our first section. So if you have not seen the Stuff You Should Know and then the Meisterhouse series, I recommend you go back and watch that, or if you want to get more just a quick refresher, check the video in the playlist just before this, which is the Why Meisterhouse. So, what we move into now is the Vier, or the four guards, basically. Now, these are not going to be anything terribly complicated, and I've kind of covered these before, but I do want to go into slightly more detail about them before we move forward, as well as when we talk about the four sets. So, let's look at our four guards as described. So first, the first guard that we'll put ourselves into is Ox on our right side, which is wherein the left foot is placed forward, the sword is held above the head with arms crossed so the thumb stands below. Now, sometimes a lot of people interpret this as being a thumb grip. I don't personally see it that way. I prefer to keep, when I'm holding the guard itself, prefer to keep my thumb just standing below, so it's telling you that your hands need to be turned upward. And the basic idea of Ox on this side is that it is, really it's a guard I like to fight out of a lot. This is a guard about guarding your head, projecting both thrust and cut potential, as well as it keeps your hands and torso back. So compared to what we'll get into later about being on the shoulder, which really does open you a lot more, this is projecting much more threat. As long as you're mindful of that elbow, you're keeping most of your body relatively close to hand. Anything comes in, you have the option of thrusting, or alternatively you have the option of cutting very easily. Really is one of the better guards I find to use as an initial sort of plan and fighting from. And I do believe that it was a lot more common than you see it today. Now the other way of taking Ox is that we're going to stand with our right foot forward, the hands will be uncrossed, and once again the sword will be with my hand below it, so here. Again, some people can interpret this with thumb on the blade, however it does not necessarily specifically say that, so I prefer to keep it where my thumb stands below and my edges to the sky. Now, out of these two guards, the most important thing about them is their asymmetry. Right Ox is loaded, it's curled, it's shorter, but it has the potential to go farther. When I stand in right Ox, I can very easily push my arms towards their full extension, or I can turn to push my arms towards their full extension. This is not very difficult for me to do. When I'm in left Ox, on the other hand, my arms can extend much further by pure default. However, for me to execute any sort of aggressive action, so for example, doing more than just a straight line thrust, doing a turning thrust shortens me. Doing a turning cut shortens me. This is not necessarily a terrible thing, but it does put a split in my brain between these two. This is where we also get into the idea of mirror images, or rather inverted images. When it comes to the four guards, one of my pet theories, best way of thinking about it I find, is to think of these as all inverts of each other, like a playing card, how it'll have two different pictures on each side. With the Oxes, it's the same idea. My right Ox is my most aggressive. I should be entering into this while it can defend my head. It's really more about its potential to come forward and do evil. So if something does come into this gap, that's when its defensive potential can come in. But it's more about how it moves there. If it moves there with the tip, it gets the ability to unfurl with the cut. If it moves there with the hands, it gets the potential to thrust. Which also, if I'm just doing that motion on its own, this is how I thrust. This is how I cut. And that's my general entry for that. On the other hand, if I'm taking left Ox, this is my more defensive guard. I'm only here because I'm looking to cover something. So if I try to cut from here, that's going to take a long time. Try to thrust from here, my straight line thrust is good, but any sort of turning of Vinden will take too long and shorten me. I'm really more focused on, if I'm going to be here, it's because I'm dealing with something and trying to maintain what I have. These blend together very well with that thrust that I showed a moment ago, wherein from my right Ox, I can push forward into my left Ox, either as a defensive or offensive movement, kind of like our Meisterhouse. And this puts me into a good place I would like to be. Now, that's our Oxes taken care of. Let's talk about our next guard, which is our Flug. Flug, or plow, is best thought of as how you're going to push things forward. My left foot is put forward, my hand is held here by my right hip, and my long edge stands below, so about here. Now you'll see a couple different depictions of Flug, in particular on the left side, where you'll see it turn back a little bit more. I like to treat this as being something I can do in depth. If I'm looking to play a little bit more forward in the moment, more of just moving through this position, threatening on the low line because I don't want to do ox for whatever reason, my hips are still the exact same as they would be if I were up in any other guard. So here. If I am looking to start loading it for some of the plays we'll do later, like the upsets, I will start opening and deepening this so that when I push my hands forward, the hips will come with it as well as I drive my plow across the field. So here's that motion again. Just normal sort of loaded fluke, chambered fluke, and what it gets me. When I take fluke on the left side, this is where things change. My right foot is forward, my sword is held by my left knee, but my long edge needs to be standing upward. So this does put me into a thumb grip. Now, this is a good thing because especially if you're taking left fluke, you really don't want to be hanging out here very much. The big mistake that people make when they use left fluke is that they stand here. There's a deeper conversation to be had here, but at least as far as the actions from the Zettel are concerned, this is not a very good engaging position. It would be much better if I were to be in long point where I can already be fighting from it, or go ahead and be back. By having that thumb on the blade, I'm automatically shortening my arms a little bit, giving myself a bit more pressure on my inside line, and also when I then choose to close this in, remember I talked about things have to be shorter on the left side, that thumb grip is going to help make this stronger. I'm getting over, essentially, a weakness that is present just by nature of coming from my left side. You can make an argument about doing the same thing in left ox, but as far as ox is concerned, it's not as big of a deal as when we're going on the low line. This especially, you'll see a couple of depictions where it's really, really deep, almost turned entirely backwards. I don't mind doing this at all. This is just adding more to that motion that I'm going to be using. So there are our two flukes. Now, what's the point of fluke and ox, which are also inverts of each other? It's about how you want to be attacking the four openings. So, there's opening from my right, opening from my left, opening from my lower right, opening from my lower left, and it's all coming to center the camera where I am looking. Just depending upon what I hope to seek, what I hope to hunt, is when I will move through these respective positions. And you see how that flows relatively well together. You can transition from one to the other without much difficulty, and it really does just bear into center. Now, let's get into our next two, which is the idea of Alber and Vom Tag. Alber is very specifically right foot forward with the sword held low in the middle of the body. Now the purpose of this is because it's the inverse of Vom Tag. We'll get to that again in a second. There's not a lot of point in standing left foot forward with your sword low. If your left foot's forward, you should be at range where you can pass in and attack somebody. The only reason your right foot should be forward initially is that you just passed in and attacked somebody. We don't want to be standing close to someone without our points online. So this is the end of all of your cuts. Any action that you could do can end here from your dominant side. Alber is a foolish thing to start in, of course, because, well, all it does is invite people to attack you. This is a kind of universal, hey, come hit me sort of guard, but as a byproduct, you're always inviting them to get the first swing. And this I talked about at the Y Meisterhouse section, which was, there's no reason to add complexity. If you see a person is open, their sword is pointing toward the floor, cut them. Don't worry about trying to do anything complex. And really, the counter to this guard, the Zettel, is just cutting them on a vertical line, so they have to guard high. This is meant to be used almost exclusively because you finish an action, thus you've ended up here, or you are inviting action, and you'll always have to do a notch response. This blends very well with moving up into your left ox, and it's not, I think, uncommon that most people will figure out how to do the following of cut from right, end up in Alber, guard, and ox as they protect themselves. It's one of the more universal movements I think almost everyone figures out entirely on their own. Now, Vom Tag. The left foot is forward, and the sword is held either at the shoulder or above the head. Now this is where we can get also into the idea of like deepening if we want to. So when it comes to holding at the shoulder, I can keep it square, and I'm a big advocate of if you're gonna be here, use it or lose it. Don't make this an engaging fighting position. It should be just like we did in the Meisterhouse section, approach, do your thing. It makes a relatively deep opening, same as Alber did. Alber is all about inviting you to go straight for me. Something like Flug or Ox is not, it's about going for my blade. Vom Tag is the same idea. Ox is about keeping away, while Dog is about bringing people in. So when I invite someone close to me, I want to make sure that I'm ready and loaded to go. This is basically everything Alber is not. This loads me for defensive actions. This loads me for offensive actions. Now, as far as being above the head, this is where you can start deepening things. I could choose to hold it more square, a la the way I like to hold it on my shoulder. Or alternatively, I can start opening the back of my body and making this a bit more flat, like here. There's nothing wrong with doing either of these. It just slightly changes the mechanics that you get to cut with. And I recommend that you play around with them. There are some times when it's most appropriate for me to just be in front of me. There are other times when I need that little bit of extra juice from the side. Regardless though, I throw a cut from here, and up and over. So, those are our 4 guards. It's nothing new, like I said. This reintroduction to the series is not going to be anything terribly complicated. But the intention behind it is this. These 4 guards are all about really 2 different mindsets. The point forward guards are the ones you fight from. They're the ones where I get people thinking about my sword, dealing with my sword, and I will hunt as I go through the 4 openings. And they are the best representation of what we will later turn into the 4 Hunt. Vomtag and Alber, they're all about the simple stuff. Am I open and ready to defend, or am I open and ready to attack? That's about it. And I find that, while sure, complexity can come from there, most of the times they lead to just simpler things, a la the Meisterhau or fighting to get into a hunt. Now, of course, the next bit would, at least if you're going chronologically with the book at home, would be the Vier, so the settings on. That's just how you counter these guards. So we've already gone over that. If you want to see that in more detail, go back to the last video just before this playlist, just before this one in the playlist, and I explained a little bit more. But those are the guards given their just attention, formed exactly as how the text says to be, and what you do out of them. So, next time, we'll start picking up and seeing on how not to pair. So, thank you very, very much. We'll go over some other techniques another time.